Picture this. We're in Buffalo, New York, and it's way past midnight. And inside a dimly lit roller skating rink, there is a 6-year-old boy standing there. His hands are raw from scrubbing toilets and organizing rental skates for hours. The disco music is still pounding through his skull. He hasn't slept for more than a few hours in days. And somewhere in the back office, he can hear his father's voice rising. And then the unmistakable sound of leather hitting skin. This is David Goggins' childhood. And this isn't just the occasional nightmare. This is every single night. His father, Travis Goggins, owns Skateland, one of Buffalo's most popular roller rinks. But behind closed doors, he runs it like a tyrant. He's forcing his wife, Jackie, and his 2 young sons to work grueling shifts, night after night, without pay. And there's one particular story that really sticks with me. When David gets sick, I'm talking a severe ear infection that needs medical attention, his mother finally dares to take him to the hospital. But when they return home, Travis beats her so badly that young David jumps in his father's back to protect her, and he gets the belt himself that night. Now, here's what absolutely blows my mind about this moment. This kid, this terrified, exhausted, traumatized child, is eventually going to become someone that the United States Navy calls the toughest man alive. He's going to complete 3 hell weeks in a single year. He's going to run 205 miles with an undiagnosed hole in his heart. He's going to do over 4,000 pull-ups in 17 hours. He's going to become a living, breathing symbol of what happens when a human being absolutely refuses to be defined by their circumstances. But right now, standing in that rink, he's just a scared little boy trying to survive until morning. So how the hell does someone undergo such a transformation? That is exactly what you and I are going to talk about today. So let's dive in. Welcome to Inflection Moments. I'm David Franklin, and you and I are about to dive into something fascinating. You know that moment when everything changes for an entrepreneur? When one decision, one pivot, one breakthrough suddenly shifts their entire trajectory. That's what we're hunting for today. If you're building something, if you're that founder grinding it out, making those impossible decisions that keep you up at night, this episode is for you. Because today, we're going inside the mind of one of the most successful entrepreneurs in history to uncover the exact moments that transformed their journey from ordinary to extraordinary. Here's what we're doing. We're dissecting the 5 most pivotal inflection points in their career, but more importantly, we're uncovering the strategic thinking behind each decision, the kind of insight that separates the builders from the dreamers. Ready? Let's get started. Before we dive into the pivotal moments in David's life, it's worth a brief bit of context about him. David is not a founder in the traditional sense. He doesn't build a startup. He doesn't raise a seed round. There are no references of term sheets or cap tables here. But here's the thing that really gets me. What he does build is actually more impressive and more useful for anyone trying to build something meaningful. He builds this unrivaled sense of resilience to pain that makes him unbreakable to setbacks that would destroy most people. And if you're someone who's trying to build a company, a product, a category, you're going to need a boatload of resilience because that's the game that you're playing too. In the world that you and I live in, founders are constantly getting punched in the face, rejection, self-doubt, markets that don't care, competitors that move faster. You're going to have long stretches where quitting doesn't just feel tempting, it feels logical. David's story is a masterclass in what's still possible when your mind is screaming, I'm done. In his words, when your mind tells you that you're finished, you've only used about 40% of what you're actually capable of. The other 60%, that lives on the far side of what he calls suffering. Now that word sounds extreme, and with David it is extreme, but underneath the intensity, there's something very practical here for anyone that's trying to build from nothing. Your perceived limit is usually not your actual limit. All right, now let's get into it. It's 1983, and David is 8 years old. His mother, Jackie, has finally hit that point that a lot of people never reach. She's done. She's going to do the thing that for years has felt literally impossible. She's going to escape. For years, Travis has beaten her, controlled her, humiliated her. He controls the money, he controls the house, he controls the schedule, he controls everything. But Jackie, she's smart, she's resourceful, and quietly, she starts playing her own game. She sweet talks him into getting a credit card in her name. She enlists the help of a neighbor named Betty. She starts building an off ramp piece by piece. And then one day, when Tronis is still at the rink, Jackie loads David into the car and drives. They end up in Brazil, Indiana, a small, predominantly white town where her parents live. On paper, this looks like victory, right? They've escaped the physical abuse, they're out of the house, there's no more skate land, no more belt, no more leather on skin every night. But here's the thing that you and I have to keep in mind. David does not arrive in Indiana as a blank slate. He's already carrying years of trauma inside of his nervous system, years of what researchers call toxic stress. And it's not just emotional, it's written all over his body. He has memory problems. He has a severe stutter. He can't focus. His hair is falling out. His skin has lost pigments and patches. He can barely read. School, up until now, has never been just a place to learn. It's just been another environment to survive for David. So, yes, Jackie's escaped the house, but the war inside David's head, that's just getting started. At this point, all that David wants is just to be normal. He wants to fit in at school. He wants to have friends. He wants to stop being terrified all the time. He wants to feel like he matters, like he's not just this invisible, broken kid drifting through hallways. That's all he's worried about. Please, just let me be normal. David is one of the few black kids in town, and the racism is relentless. Kids write the N-word in his school notebooks. Someone draws a noose next to his name. One night, driving down a rural road, a man pulls up alongside their car and points a shotgun at them. Just imagine that. You escape this brutal household, you think you're finally getting to safety, and now you're staring down a shotgun on a dark country road. Meanwhile, academically, David's drowning. Keep in mind, his learning difficulties are not about intelligence. It's that he's never actually been in an environment where learning was even possible. Between the late nights at Skateland, the constant fear at home, the chaos and violence, school's always been a background feature, something you just try to survive. So David does what a lot of clever, traumatized kids do. He develops coping mechanisms. He cheats, he fakes it, he learns how to get by without really ever engaging. He figures out how to appear like he's moving forward without doing the thing that actually terrifies him, which is to confront how far behind he really is. But here's the problem with that strategy. It compounds. By the time that he's in high school, David's basically a shell. He's a kid with a 1.6 GPA who's quietly given up on himself before he's even really started. You see this with a lot of founders, by the way. On the outside, they're in the game, but internally, they've already quit. They're just going through the motions. So going back to David, here's where things start to get interesting. After high school, David decides that he wants to join the Air Force. His grandfather served in the Air Force, and there's something about the military that calls to him. It might be the structure, it might be the sense of purpose, or maybe it's just a way out. But there's a hard gate in front of that dream, which is the ASVAB. For context, the ASVAB is a standardized test. It's got math, reading, comprehension, all the stuff he's been quietly avoiding his entire life. And to get into the Air Force, you have to pass it. But David fails it twice. This is the exact kind of moment where the old David folds. The pattern would be, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good at school, this is just who I am. But instead, we see the first real glimpse of the version of David Goggins the world is going to know later. Instead of running from the truth, he does something radical. He gets brutally honest with himself. He looks in the mirror and for the first time sees not the story he wants to believe about himself, but what is actually there. A scared kid who has been lying to himself and everyone else for years. And he starts attacking the problem in a way that's very Goggins. He grabs post-it notes. He writes down all the things he's been hiding from. Not soft affirmations, not you're enough and you're special. He writes, you're fat, you're lazy, you're stupid. And then underneath each one, he writes about what he's going to do about it. This becomes what he later calls the accountability mirror. And David explains this in his own words. He says, the mirror doesn't lie. You can't look in the mirror and tell yourself some bullshit story. That person staring back at you knows exactly who you are and what you're hiding from. For 6 months, David studies, not casually, obsessively. He has to relearn everything he should have learned in grade school and high school. He is, in his early 20s, basically teaching himself to read properly for the first time in his life. And he does it alone. Every night, he's staring at that mirror, refusing to let himself off the hook, refusing to look away from the gaps, refusing to pretend. And David's saying to himself, I'm not going to be the guy who hides behind excuses anymore. I'm going to confront the truth, however ugly it is, and I'm going to do something about it. So David takes the ASVAB a third time, and this time he passes. Not only that, he scores high enough to qualify for the Air Force Pararescue Program, which is one of the most elite training pipelines in the entire military. But this test score isn't actually the most important part of this story. The real inflection point is internal. For the first time in his life, David confronts the unfiltered truth about himself. He accepts responsibility for it, and he proves to himself that he can change that reality through sustained effort. He stops running from his past and he starts using it as fuel. So, thinking about this, what's powerful about this moment is that David's growth begins with radical honesty. No euphemisms, no rationalizations, no, I had a tough childhood, so this is just how I am. Just here is the truth, and here's what I'm going to do next. So, the founders listening to this story, it's massive. The accountability mirror is a tool that you can steal directly from David. It forces you to be honest with yourself in a way that most people never embrace. Once you can look that reality in the face without flinching, everything changes. That's the pattern that David sets here. And you're going to see the same playbook, radical honesty, followed by insane levels of effort, show up again and again in the next inflection points. And the next one, that's when things get really wild. All right, fast forward to 1999. David's 24 years old, and he's a mess. Now, here's what happened after the Air Force. He'd made it into pararescue training, which is this elite special operations rescue program. It's what he's dreamed about. It's what he rebuilt himself to become. But there was one problem he doesn't see coming: water. Pararescue involves extensive water training. And David, he is terrified of drowning. He can't swim well. And these confidence tests, where instructors basically try to make you panic underwater, are breaking him. 6 weeks into training, military doctors discover he has a sickle cell trait. It's not disqualifying, but they give him a medical option to leave, and David takes it. As he later admits, he says, it kind of gave me a way out. I didn't want to go back into the water, so I pretty much just quit. And here's where the downward spiral begins. David finishes his Air Force commitment doing something called tactical air control. It's a legitimate job, but it's not the elite path he envisioned for himself. And as the shame of quitting settles in, he starts eating. A lot. By the time he leaves the Air Force, David weighs 297 pounds. He takes a job as an exterminator. He's spraying for cockroaches in restaurants and homes in the middle of the night. And his diet is a box of mini donuts and a chocolate milkshake every single shift. As David describes it, he says, I was sitting on my couch, 297 pounds, box of mini donuts, chocolate milkshake. I wasn't living. I was just existing. And look, you and I have to pause here because this is a guy who had just proven himself through this accountability mirror, through the ASVAB, through earning a spot on pararescue, that he could rebuild himself from nothing. But life doesn't care about your previous wins. It's not some cumulative scoreboard. You can still fall, and hard. And David is at the bottom. And he can feel it gnawing at him. This sense that he's capable of something bigger, that he's wasting his potential, that he's meant for something more than spraying roaches and eating mini donuts on a couch at 2 a.m. But he doesn't know how to access it. He's trapped in this cycle of self-loathing and comfort eating. And it's possible that you probably felt something like this gnawing sense that you're off track, you're capable of more, but you can't see the path. David's there and he's stuck. But one night everything changes. David's flipping through the channels and he stumbles onto a documentary about Navy SEAL training, or BUDS, the most punishing military training program in the world. He watches these men getting absolutely destroyed, cold, exhausted, pushed beyond anything normal humans can endure. And something clicks. These men are everything David's not. They're lean, they're hard, they're fearless. And in that moment, David makes a decision that sounds insane, to anyone watching from the outside, he's going to become a Navy SEAL. There's just one problem. Okay, well, maybe more than one problem, but the biggest one is this. To qualify for SEAL training, you have to meet strict weight requirements. For someone David's height, 6'1", the maximum weight is 191 pounds. Keep in mind, David weighs 297 pounds, so he's going to need to lose over 100 pounds, and he's only got 3 months to do it. Every recruiter laughs at him. One of them tells him, people don't walk into this office at 297 pounds trying to be a SEAL. You walk in looking the way I look now. So this is where you and I have to ask ourselves, what would we do? Most people would take that as confirmation that the dream is impossible, that we should aim smaller, and that we should be more realistic. But David does the opposite. What David does next is nothing short of insane. He creates a training regimen that would break most people. He wakes up at 4:30 a.m. and doesn't stop until 9 p.m. He bikes to the pool. He swims for 2 hours. He bikes to the gym. He lifts weights. He runs every single day. His caloric intake is about 800 calories a day. That is barely enough to sustain basic functions, let alone this level of training. He's essentially melting his body through sheer force of will. But here's what makes this different from just another extreme diet story. David does not approach this as some sort of fitness challenge. He approaches it as a war with himself, a battle between who he's been and who he's capable of becoming. And as he later writes, he says, I had to find a way to become someone who refused to give in, who simply finds a way no matter what. I needed to become bulletproof, a living example of resilience. So going back to the last inflection point, David uses this accountability mirror constantly. He visualizes what it will feel like to walk into that recruiter's office at 191 pounds. And he talks to himself, not with gentle encouragement, with brutal demands. In his own words, he says, get up, don't quit. You've been a quitter your whole life, not anymore. And I think you and I have to appreciate something here, because David is not trying to hit a number on a scale. He's trying to become a different kind of person altogether. A person who, when faced with this impossible gap between where they are and where they need to be, simply starts building the bridge brick by brick. In less than 3 months, David loses 106 pounds. He shows up at the Navy recruiting office at exactly 191 pounds, right at the weight limit. And this is where the story gets even crazier, because SEAL training doesn't care about how hard you work to get there. It doesn't give you any credit for the weight loss. It doesn't care about your story. It cares about one thing. Can you survive what comes next? And this is what the SEALs call Hell Week. And David's first Hell Week, a 5.5-day ordeal of continuous physical training with almost no sleep, ends early. He develops double pneumonia and stress fractures, and they roll him back to day one. So David dusts himself down and prepares for a second attempt, right? But on his second attempt, he fractures his kneecap before Hell Week even begins. Okay, so think about this. A normal person, there's no doubt about it, they're going to quit. They would have said, I gave it my best shot. The universe is clearly telling me that this isn't my path. But David isn't wired like that. He doesn't quit. 2 weeks after his kneecap injury, he shows up for his third Hell Week. Same injuries, new class, instructors who don't know him, bones that are still broken. And during this third Hell Week, a trainee dies. Hell Week ends about 30 hours early. David makes it through, but with severe stress fractures and a knee that's barely holding together. And here's the insane part. He still has 22 more weeks of training ahead of him, and his body is destroyed. So what does he do? He gets duct tape, wraps his legs together so tightly that after 45 minutes, they go numb, and then he just keeps going. He completes the remaining 6 months of SEAL training with broken bones, held together by duct tape, and sheer will. In 2001, David graduates in Buds with class 235 and is assigned to SEAL Team 5. And 3 years later in 2004, he goes to Army Ranger School and graduates as Top Honor Man, the highest ranked enlisted soldier in his class. So thinking about this for founders, there's a profound lesson here. The transformation David undergoes isn't just physical, it's a complete rewiring of his identity. He went from someone who quit when things got hard to someone who refused to quit under any circumstances. And the tool he used is the same thing that worked for the ASVAB. Radical honesty with himself about who he was, combined with a refusal to accept that as permanent. What David shows is that your circumstances don't define you, your response to them does. So David is a SEAL. He is at the top of the military food chain and he's pulled off the impossible. And you'd think that that's the end of his story, but that's not how this works. Because the next inflection point is when things get really interesting. Okay, inflection point number 3, and it's June 28th, 2005. David's been a SEAL for 4 years now. He's deployed multiple times to Iraq and Afghanistan, and he's earned the respect of his teammates. Early that same day, he just graduates from military freefall school. So David's feeling good. He's in peak shape. He's going to do what he was built to do. And then, that same day, everything changes. A 4-man SEAL reconnaissance team is inserted into the mountains of Afghanistan for a mission called Operation Red Wings, and the mission goes wrong, catastrophically wrong. A helicopter sent to rescue the team is shot down. In total, 19 American service members are killed, including 11 Navy SEALs. David knows every single one of them. He had been through Hell Week with some of them. They were his brothers. Later, reflecting on that day, he says, I was devastated. I wanted to do something. I needed to find a way to help their families. You can hear it in his voice. This is a man who has built his entire identity around refusing to quit, around finding a way no matter what. And now he's facing something he cannot muscle through. He can't out-train this and he can't out-will it. He cannot bring them back. In the aftermath, David learns about the Special Operation Warrior Foundation. It's an organization that provides college scholarships to children of fallen special operations soldiers. And he decides, I'm going to raise money for them, a lot of money. But here's the problem. David's not wealthy. He's not famous. He doesn't have a platform. He doesn't have connections to high net worth donors. So what can he possibly offer? What does David have that would move the needle for an organization like this? That's the question he's wrestling with. So David discovers a race called the Badwater 135. It's a 135-mile ultra marathon through Death Valley, California, in the middle of the summer. Temperatures reach 130 degrees Fahrenheit. It's considered one of the hardest foot races on earth. And David thinks, that's it. I'm going to run this race, and that's how I'm going to raise the money. There's just one problem. The Badwater is an invitational race. You can't just sign up. To even be considered, you have to prove that you can run 100 miles in under 24 hours. Now let's put this into context. David has never run a marathon. In fact, he's not run at all in over a year. He's still built like a powerlifter. 240 pounds of muscle designed for lifting heavy things, not for running 100 miles. So he finds a qualifying race, the San Diego One Day. It's a 24-hour ultramarathon where you run as many miles as you can in a single day. And he has 3 days to prepare. 3 days to prepare for 100 miles. David shows up at the San Diego One Day having never run more than 20 miles in his life. For the first few hours, things go okay. He's a SEAL. He knows how to push through discomfort. But by mile 70, his body is breaking down in ways he never imagined. His kidneys are failing. He's urinating blood. He's got what feels like dozens of bones in his feet broken. He has stress fractures in his shins so severe that each step feels like being stabbed. He sits down in a chair and realizes he cannot stand up. He's urinating blood down his leg. The race medics are telling him to stop. They're telling him to go to the hospital. And here's the moment. David is sitting in that chair, completely destroyed, covered in his own blood, and he's got a choice. He can quit. And honestly, no one would blame him. He's given it everything. He's already done more than most people could ever do. Or he can find something more. Most people, when they hit this wall, they stop. They listen to the medics. They listen to their body. They listen to the part of the brain that is screaming, you're done. But David, as has been the case with all the inflection points up until this point, he finds a way to stand up. He later says, I had to reach into a place I didn't know existed. I had to find a gear that wasn't about physical strength. It was about refusing to accept that this was the end. So he gets up, he starts walking, then he starts jogging, and then he starts running again. He finishes 101 miles in under 24 hours. Think about what just happened here. David didn't finish because his body was strong enough. His body was wrecked. He finished because he found a way to override every signal that was telling him to stop. He accessed that 60% that lives on the other side of suffering. So David qualifies for Badwater. He raises over $2 million for the Special Operations Warrior Foundation over the next several years. He becomes one of the most accomplished ultra marathon runners in the world, completing more than 60 ultra endurance events. But the real result is not the money that David raised or the medals. The real result here is that David discovers a new layer of what he's capable of. Until this point, he thought becoming a SEAL was the pinnacle. He thought that was the most challenging thing that a human could do. But this showed him that suffering is not something to be endured and just survived. It's something to be sought out. It's the portal to the next version of yourself. And here's what gets me about this story. Most people, when they achieve something difficult, like becoming a SEAL, they protect that identity. They don't risk it. They don't go looking for a new mountain that might break them publicly. But David does the opposite. He voluntarily enters a domain where he is a complete beginner, where he has no guarantee of success, and where he could fail in front of everyone. And when he hits that wall at mile 70, when his body is shutting down, he doesn't just endure it, he runs towards it. He treats that moment of absolute breakdown as the point of interest, as the place where the real work begins. So for founders listening to this, that's everything. Building a company is going to bring you to that chair. Metaphorically speaking, you're going to hit mile 70. Your product launch is going to flop. Your best employee is going to quit. Your funding round is going to fall apart. Your competitors are going to copy you. And you're going to want to sit down. You're going to want to listen to the medics. You're going to want to quit. But the takeaway you can take from David here is this. The moment you want to quit is not the end. It's just the beginning. That is where the 60% lives. That is where your identity gets forged. And that is where you find out who you actually are. And again, that's worth repeating. That moment is when you find out who you actually are. Most founders treat suffering like a tax that they have to pay on the way to success. But David treats it as the product itself. The suffering is the point. The struggle is where the value is created. So when you hit your version of mile 70, and you will, don't ask how I can make this stop. Instead, think about, what's this teaching me? What gear is this forcing me to access? And who do I have to become to keep moving? And the next inflection point, that's where David faces maybe the most brutal test of his entire life. All right, so David is a SEAL. He's an ultramarathon runner. He's done the impossible multiple times, but there's something that's been bothering him. He keeps noticing this weird thing with his heart. It's not dramatic or anything. It's subtle, but it's there. During training, he'll get these moments where he feels like his heart is skipping or it's working way too hard for what he's doing. David ignores it because that's what David does. You push through discomfort, you don't complain. But then, in 2009, something starts to feel off. He's training for the race across America, which is a 3,000-mile bike race across the US. And he hits a wall he's never felt before. He just can't go anymore. So he finally goes to the doctor, they run the tests, and they discover something that absolutely blows my mind. This guy, who has completed 3 Navy SEAL Hell Weeks, run over 100 miles in a day, and hammered his body through ultramarathons and triathlons, he's been doing all of it, with an undiagnosed hole in his heart, a congenital atrial septal defect he's had since birth. In plain English, that's a hole between the upper chambers of his heart, and it's been there his whole life. Think about that. The man that's been operating at a level that 0.0001% of humans could ever approach, and his heart has been structurally compromised the entire time. The doctors tell him he needs surgery. They need to patch the hole. So David has the surgery. It's supposed to be routine. But here's the thing. When you operate on someone who's built their entire identity around being unbreakable, the idea of being broken is terrifying. He wakes up from the surgery and he feels weak. He feels vulnerable. He feels like the thing that made him David Goggins might be gone forever. The doctors tell him, you got to take it easy. You got to recover. You can't train for a while. But David does what David does. He starts training again before he's cleared. He's doing pull-ups. He's running and he's pushing. And then a few months later, he gets more bad news. The patch doesn't hold. There's still a leak, and he needs a second surgery. Okay, so you and I need to pause for a moment here because this is a moment when most people would take the hint. The universe is basically saying, hey, you've done enough. You've proven everything that you need to prove. Maybe it's time to scale back. So David hears that message and he decides he's got to go bigger. After the second surgery, David is now cleared to resume activity. The patch is sealed and his heart is finally whole. But he doesn't just want to go back to doing what he was doing. He wants to prove to himself, maybe to the universe, that this setback didn't break him, that he is still him. So he sets this absolutely insane goal: break the Guinness World Record for pull ups completed in 24 hours. The record at the time is 4,020 pull ups. Let's just sit with that number for a second. 4,020 pull ups. That's not a workout or just some fitness challenge. That is a war of attrition against your own body. We're talking about doing pull ups continuously for 17 plus hours, thousands upon thousands of repetitions until your hands are bleeding, your muscles are screaming, and your mind is telling you there is no possible way to do one more. That is the goal that David sets for himself. So David's first attempt at this is on the Today Show, and that first attempt fails. The pull-up bar on the set is faulty. It sags. He tweaks his wrist, can't get into a rhythm, and falls way short of the record. So he goes back, he trains more, he prepares better. His second attempt is at a CrossFit gym in Tennessee, and his hands literally rip open on the bar. The skin tears, the blisters pop, and he has to stop again. Now, here's where you and I have to put ourselves in his shoes. You've just attempted something that 99.9% of humans wouldn't even try once, and you failed twice. Your body has told you, in very clear terms, this is not possible for you. A normal person would take that data and say, all right, I gave it my best shot. Time to move on. But David comes back for a third try, back at that same CrossFit gym in Tennessee. For 17 hours and 16 minutes, David does pull ups. His hands are shredded. He develops burns from the friction of the bar. He's in constant agony, but he keeps going. And he finishes with 4,030 pull ups in under 24 hours, setting a new Guinness World Record. But here's what I find fascinating about this moment. And it's not the number of pull ups, it's what the process taught him. Between the training for all three attempts, David had done more than 67,000 pull ups in 9 months. 67,000 pull ups. That is obsession. That is a refusal to accept that failure is final. So later, reflecting on the experience, David writes about what he calls the empowerment of failure. He says, I learned more from failing than I ever did from succeeding. When you fail, you see where your weaknesses are, and that's the only way to actually get better. Each failure showed David what he needed to adjust, what he needed to strengthen, and what he needed to approach differently. The first failure taught him to control the environment and make the bar stable. The second failure taught him, condition your hands, build the calluses, manage the friction. And the third attempt, when he finally succeeded, was built on the back of those two failures. So David completes 4,030 pull-ups. He sets the record, but the real result is internal. He proves to himself that those heart surgeries didn't break him, that the time off didn't soften him, that he's still capable of finding that gear that lives beyond the 40%. So for founders, this is pure gold. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the path to it. So I'll say that one more time because I think it's important. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the path to it. Every startup that eventually wins has a graveyard of failed iterations, botched launches, ideas that didn't work, features that flop, marketing campaigns that drove no results. The founders who succeed are the ones who treat those failures not as the endpoints, but as data. And this theme comes up again and again and again on these episodes we've done so far on Inflection Moments. They ask, what can I learn from this? What needs to change? And how do I come back stronger? David's heart surgery also teaches something important about vulnerability. For years, he'd been pushing his body without knowing it was fundamentally compromised. But David's story doesn't end here. The final inflection point is maybe the most surprising because it's not about improving something to himself anymore. It's about teaching someone else how to access what he's found, and that changes everything. Okay, final inflection point now. It's December 2010, and Jesse Itzler, an entrepreneur, co founder of Marcus Jet, and part owner of the Atlanta Hawks, is out in San Diego running a 24-hour race as part of a relay team. So his team is doing what relay teams do: rotate, rest, trade off. But in the middle of this, Jesse notices something weird. There's this one guy running alone. No crew rotation, no relay teammate tagging in, just one man. He looks absolutely destroyed, body wrecked, form falling apart, but he refuses to stop. And that man is David Goggins. Jesse can't get this image out of his head. Who is this guy? Why is he doing this? Why does he keep going even when his body is clearly done? So after the race, he tracks Goggins down and makes him an offer that sounds insane to pretty much anyone else. He asks, "Come live with me and my family for a month. Train me. Show me how you do what you do." And David agrees under one condition. Jesse has to do whatever David tells him to do. No negotiation, no edits, no excuses. So you can already see where this is going. For David, this is new. Up until this point, his entire life has basically been an internal contest, proving things to himself, testing his own limits, and running his own experiments and suffering. Now he has the opportunity to do something different, show someone else how to access what he's found, prove that his methods aren't just for SEALs and ultra endurance freaks, but for regular high performers like entrepreneurs, parents, people with jobs and families who are willing to get uncomfortable. So the desire shifts. It's not just how far can I go? It becomes, can I pull someone else into this world and transform them too? What follows is one of the most intense months of Jesse Itzler's life. David shows up and immediately starts stress testing the entire household. It's 14 degrees outside. Perfect. They're going to go for a 6-mile run. David wears shorts and a t-shirt. When they get back, David gives Jesse 1 hour. Then 100 pull-ups. The training is relentless and completely unconventional. David wakes Jesse up in the middle of the night for surprise workouts. He pushes him way past what Jesse thinks are his limits. He refuses to accept excuses, negotiations, or complaints. As Itzler later wrote, his motto was, "If it doesn't suck, we don't do it," which is such an insane standard, but it perfectly captures David's entire operating system. And here's what makes this more than just some extreme fitness story. In the process of training Jesse, David isn't just building his body, he's rewiring his mind. And he's showing him experientially that the limits he thought were real were actually these safety mechanisms that kick in long before the body truly fails. So, you know that feeling when you think you're probably done at 10 out of 10 effort? David's whole point is you're probably at a 4, maybe a 5. This month with David impacts Jesse so much that he does what entrepreneurs do. He turns the experience into a story. He writes a book called Living with a SEAL, 31 Days Training with the Toughest Man on the Planet. It becomes a New York Times bestseller. It introduces David to an entirely new audience, people who would never have heard of some random Navy SEAL or ultramarathon guy otherwise. But the more important change is on David's side. This experience crystallizes something for him. He realizes that his real mission isn't just to run races or stat records and chase ever harder physical challenges. His real mission is to share what he's learned, to turn his life into a blueprint, to become the message. That shift leads directly to his own book, Can't Hurt Me, which is published in 2018. And that's an awesome book, by the way. I read it, could not recommend it more. And the book explodes. It becomes one of the best-selling self-help memoirs of all time, over 5 million copies sold. In it, he lays out his entire story, but more importantly, the mental tools that he's developed along the way. And we've been through a few of them already, but it includes things like the accountability mirror, the 40% rule, callousing the mind, taking souls, and cookie jar. So just picking one of these out, the idea of callousing the mind is especially powerful. Just like lifters build calluses on their hands from friction and load, David argues that you can build mental calluses by deliberately exposing yourself to discomfort. Every hard thing you do adds a layer. At first, everything hurts. Rejection, long hours, tough conversations, and brutal feedback. But over time, things that would have shattered you before barely register. You've changed your pain threshold, not by reading about resilience, but by living it. From here, David stops being a niche legend in endurance circles and becomes one of the most influential voices in personal development. His long form podcasts, especially on things like Joe Rogan, go viral, millions of views. Clips of him talking about suffering, excuses, and the 40% rule flood social media. His Instagram following climbs into the millions. In 2022, he publishes a second book, Never Finished. And in it, he writes, a lot of people think that once they reach a certain level of status, respect, or success, that they've made it in life. I'm here to tell you that you always have to find more. Greatness is not something that if you meet it once, it stays with you forever. It evaporates like a flash of oil in a hot pan. That is such a brutal and accurate image. Greatness evaporates like a flash of oil in a hot pan. You don't get to keep it, you re-earn it over and over again. And David lives this. He's in his 50s and he's still running, still lifting, still doing hard things, still refusing to coast on his past achievements. Because he's not just talking about staying tough, he's actually doing it. So for founders listening, this fifth inflection point is about one core idea: becoming the message yourself. David isn't just telling people to do hard things, he's the living embodiment that those principles work. That is why his words land. That's where his credibility comes from. It's not manufactured through branding or positioning, it's earned through consistency. As a founder, the same principles apply. If you talk about high standards, but you cut corners, people feel that. If you preach resilience, but you collapse at the first sign of trouble, people see that. And if you tell your team to embrace discomfort, but you optimize your own life for convenience, that dissonance destroys the trust that you have with your team. The most effective founders embody the culture that they want to build. So again, the most effective founders embody the culture they want to build. They take ownership. They seek out hard conversations. They lean into the work that nobody wants to do. So David's final evolution from lone sufferer to a global messenger is a reminder that the highest leverage thing that you can do as a leader is not just to tell people what you believe, it's to live it so loudly that you don't have to. All right, so we've walked through all 5 inflection points, and here's when you and I need to step back and do what we promised at the beginning of the episode: pull out the common threads. Because remember, the whole point of this podcast is understanding what makes the decision making and strategic thinking of extraordinary people so different. And David Goggins, for all his physical accomplishments, is ultimately a case study in building a mindset that's built on a stratospheric level of resilience. And here are the 3 common threads that speak to this, in my opinion. The first one in David's journey is this idea of radical honesty as your competitive edge. Every single inflection point in David's life begins with the same move: telling himself the truth. When he was failing the ASVAB and going nowhere, he looked in that mirror and admitted he was lazy, undisciplined, and scared. When he was 297 pounds eating donuts on his couch, he admitted he'd become a quitter who was wasting his potential. When he was urinating blood at mile 70 of his first ultramarathon, he admitted his body was destroyed, and then asked himself what else he had. Most people lie to themselves constantly. We tell ourselves we're working hard when we're not. We tell ourselves the market is the problem, or the timing, or the funding. We tell ourselves the failure wasn't really our fault. But David doesn't do that. He operates with what he calls no excuses, a refusal to let himself off the hook for anything. And while that sounds brutal, it's actually liberating, because once you stop making excuses, you can actually start solving problems. The second common thread about David that I notice is about changing your identity through your actions. David didn't just change his behavior, he changed who he was multiple times. He went from a scared, abused kid to an Air Force recruit, from a quitter who washed out of pararescue to a Navy SEAL, from a powerlifter who never run a marathon to one of the best ultra marathon runners in the world, from an anonymous military member to a best-selling author and a cultural phenomenon. And in every case, the transformation happened the same way, through action, not through positive thinking, not through affirmations, not through visualization alone, through doing incredibly hard things over and over until the actions rewired his identity. As he explains it, I had to go to war with myself and create a whole new identity. This is the callousing process. Each hard thing builds a layer. Each challenge you don't run from becomes evidence that you're the kind of person who doesn't run from challenges. Eventually, you're not pretending to be tough. You are tough. For founders listening, I think the takeaway here is that you need to stop waiting to feel ready. Start acting like the person that you need to become, and the feelings will follow. And the third common thread behind David's incredible mental strength is this idea that your purpose multiplies your potential for success. Here's something fascinating I find about David's story. His greatest achievements came when he was running for something bigger than himself. When he was just trying to prove he wasn't a quitter, he made it through SEAL training, barely. But when he was running to raise money for the families of his fallen brothers, he completed feats that seemed physically impossible. He literally broke his body and kept going because the purpose was bigger than his pain. As David says, purpose trumps motivation. Motivation comes and goes, but purpose stays. This connects directly to his 40% rule. When you're operating on motivation alone, you hit that 40% wall and you stop. But when you have a purpose that matters, when there's something at stake beyond your own comfort, you can access the other 60%. So for founders listening, I think it's worth being introspective about what your why is. What's the thing that's going to keep you moving when that motivation evaporates and everything hurts? The founders I know who build truly great things have an answer to that question that runs deeper than profit margins or exit valuations. And if you don't have a clear answer to that question, you're vulnerable. So find your purpose and your suffering becomes the fuel. So here's what keeps coming back to me about David Goggins' story. We live in a world that's constantly telling us to optimize for convenience. Shorter workouts, easier diets, life hacks that get us results without doing the hard work. There's a whole industry built around making difficult things feel easy. But David represents the opposite. He's not trying to make hard things feel easy. He's making easy things feel unacceptable. He's arguing that the path to becoming who you're capable of becoming runs directly through your suffering and that there's no shortcut worth taking. The path to success is brutal, but with the right mindset, anything's possible. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon. And in David's words, stay hard. Thank you for joining us on Inflection Moments. If today's story sparked a new perspective or challenged your thinking, be sure to share it with someone you know loves this stuff as much as you and I do. Maybe it's a college buddy, your water cooler buddy, or maybe even someone in the family group chat. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to our channels so you can be the first one to hear what we've got coming next. And if you're interested in insights, ideas, and lessons from some of the world's greatest entrepreneurs, sign up for our newsletter. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, keep building and talk soon.